Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a list of kind of 30 things that I thought were interesting as far as tiny changes in Reborn. Well, I say tiny, some of them are a bit more significant, but just kind of interesting, seemingly random changes that Reborn did, and just kind of wanted to discuss the hows and whys and all of that kind of thing about them. They don't really fit neatly into other categories, and I've wanted to talk about them in the past, so let's just go ahead and make an assorted list of, random odds and ends that were different and or just kind of quirky changes, as it were. Okay, so I picked 30 as an arbitrary number because, I originally was going for the full 100 and then realized around 20 or so, and they're like, you know what, this is going to take a while, and if we go all the way up to 100, it's going to be yet another, hour-plus long video. So let's go ahead and get going here. So first on the list is the Lombardia. So the reason that this is interesting is because this sword used to be an air element back in the past there, and I believe it was neutral back in SNES, if I recall correctly. But basically, this is one of those things that was a seemingly random change here. And the thing is, there's potentially a bit more to it than it originally seems. So, personally, what I thought this was on my first playthrough, and I don't think this anymore because it turns out Casho and Vice's elements are randomized, but on my first playthrough, Casho wound up as a lightning element, and so it was an interesting little change when, she ended up joining the party for good. We ended up getting the Lombardi at around the same time, and it felt like a kind of cool passing the torch moment, as it were, which, granted, it can result in that in your playthrough too, but as far as the Lombardia goes, I think this was actually changed for a different reason. So elements used to work entirely different in other versions of the game. So like back in SNES, they barely did anything other than, a few extra flavor numbers here and there. And when it came to the PSP version, it literally was just number go up. Like if you didn't have Augment Air with the Lombardia in PSP, it literally did nothing in terms of its air element. So in the case of the lightning element here, I think what actually happened is a change that was here for the purpose of smoothing out Coda. So in Coda 3, there's specifically a sort of time paradox fight where you can see the fight between Hamilton and Barbas. And so in that particular fight, essentially he's fighting versus a guy that is an Earth element. So essentially if he was Earth, his sword was Earth, he would actually probably dominate that fight a lot better than he does, because as it stands, he does perform roughly on par with how he did back in PSP, sometimes a little bit better, wherein he sometimes wins, but it's kind of a coin flip. It's almost a total coin flip. If he manages to dodge the petrification, then he has a shot. If he doesn't, he's just getting smushed immediately. And that's why there's different dialogue for just kind of whether you interfered in the fight, how much you interfered with the fight, and all of that. So it's kind of interesting that that change got made. So I think, more than likely, when they were testing it early on, probably leaving it as air element and also leaving him as air element would probably have led to him winning that fight more often than not. Granted, I still think it would have come down to that petrification, but as it stands right now, as soon as Barbas starts getting a roll on him, it's pretty rough. That being said, that actually potentially could be one of the other things that I actually didn't put on this list, but I guess would be a 31 here. But when it comes to the Knight Commander weapons, they specifically have a trait where, despite being an elemental finisher, they don't get the usual elemental finisher bonus. So for those that didn't know about this, in this version, if you've ever seen something that's kind of silly looking like this, the reason that you want to have a lot of elemental coverage on your teams is because these elemental finishers, while it's not fair to say they do exactly double damage, they functionally do something similar to double damage if you're going and using them against the right opponent. So if a Heart Crusher were to be used against an enemy, being an air element only gives it an extra 10%, but using it versus somebody that's weak to it, I, again, forget exactly how the formula goes, but it does something close to double damage versus that unit. So these are extremely effective at taking down their opposing elements. So Cherry Ronde, use that to take out air, use air to take out earth. So either way, the Knight Commander weapons, though, if they were given that bonus, oftentimes they would probably one-shot stuff more so than the 80 or 90% they often do right now. So it's kind of interesting that they have that exception. Again, it applies in that particular fight because he's always going to try to drop that petrification finisher on him as soon as he can. Okay, next up is going to be the change to stun in this version. So effectively what happened was that the stun debuff was quietly nerfed in Reborn. So this is one of those ones that was extremely oppressive back in PSP and oftentimes really pissed people off. So okay, a little quirk I should probably mention. Back in the PSP version, they had an issue in that version where they constantly doubled down way too hard on fixing one issue. This is how, for example, when it came to units dying, which was a complaint in the SNES version, they're like, we need lives, we need a countdown mechanic, we need a skill transfer mechanic, we need to have easier revives, we're going to take an item that was like practically unique in the SNES version, and now you can buy them unlimited in the shop. Like, they gave you so many friggin' ways to go and get your people back that the original problem was beyond kind of wiped out of existence, to the point that it became trivial to ever keep anyone alive, and rarely would you ever see a casualty. So either way, when it came to Reborn, typically there was a lot more of a kind of soft touch as far as not going too far about overcorrection, which is one of those reasons that I really appreciate this version. But one of those things that had changed was when it came to stun. So I've mentioned this before in terms of debuff spam in earlier versions, especially the Japanese version. It is extremely obnoxious in the Japanese version because Japanese and PSP versions of the PSP version of the game did actually have different stuff to them. It's like the Japanese version had what a lot of... Okay, this is one of those funny arguments. Like, oh, it had smarter AI, I can't believe they nerfed it. There's a difference between it's smarter and, you know, more fun to play with. Because it's effectively like that one guy that shows up to, like, let's say you're going and you're playing some Catan or something, and they realize that you don't have one resource, and they're just going to sit there bullying you for it for the next hour. Like, refusing to trade with anybody because they realize they have a monopoly. Like, yeah, sure, it's technically smarter, but dude, you're an asshole. Anyway, basically that's what happened with the AI back in that version, where, for example, in the US version that we got, one of the most annoying things that people would run into was stun spam. So the AI loved to spam Paralytic Wave. 0% chance to hit? Screw it. Just keep spamming Paralytic Wave. To the point where oftentimes they would have entire lines of Terenites not physically fighting anything, but just going and, you know, shooting out 2% to hit Paralytic Waves over and over. Now, is that extremely obnoxious? Yes, most of those attacks are missing, but then as soon as they don't, you've got a lot of units that are potentially getting their turns deleted and stuff like that. So it wasn't unusual to see your whole party eventually succumb to this tide of annoyingness. Now, the thing was, you could become completely immune to it, and then you're just permanently dedicating a slot and or a shield slot to just avoiding stun all the time. So you're now locked into a build from the beginning of the game to the end of the game to avoid a debuff that the AI just simply can't help itself with, right? So one of the things that they changed was when it came to stun here, was actually gave it more or less exactly the Pokemon effect of being 50% chance to delete your turn. And this is something that's already incredibly strong. Like, if you can imagine with stuff like the Cyclops and whatnot, that effect would have been potentially way worse if they kept the original stun effect. Why? Because stun used to get rid of counterattacks, which don't exactly come up, you know, all the time or anything, but still they would get rid of counter-type effects, which would just mostly be obnoxious in this particular case, because it would put even more emphasis on one-handed weapons over two-handed ones. So either way, it's not surprising that they made this change, given that not everybody can go ahead and equip counter at the same time. But still though, it's kind of interesting that they added this here. To me, it feels more like a one-handed versus two-handed balance thing, more so than directly addressing stun itself. Because that effect was actually redundant. PSP had a lot of redundant effects, and so, for example, Curse also does the same thing, and that's something you can still curse enemy units to do. Like, Curse is quietly one of those little debuffs that like really messes units up a lot more than you'd kind of expect. Like, it sets their luck to 0, it gets rid of their counters, it lowers their maximum health and MP. It's a weirdly diabolical little thing. But yeah, like, it doesn't really mention this in the description any. They're like, oh, it just kind of lowers their numbers a little bit. Like, no, it actually messes them up pretty good in all directions. Anyway, so yeah, this one was quietly nerfed a little bit, and yeah, just kind of an interesting little change there. Okay, next up is a much simpler one. In that zombies are technically human, since, you know, they still retain some humanity. Is that a lore thing? I like to think so, because, yeah, when you go and talk to a zombie humanoid, they are classed as human this time. And what's interesting is that they actually, zombies in general got a pretty massive glow up in Reborn. Like, I don't see this talked about that much, but zombies were functionally near useless back in PSP, and they were extremely overpowered back in SNES. Like, back in SNES, almost nothing carried exorcism, so you could essentially go and hire some undead at the very start of the game, and realistically, it isn't until chapter like 3 or 4 that anything could even remotely be a threat to them. In PSP, though, you basically had a unit that couldn't learn skills, that ended up training up its skills at a way lower rate. So basically, they, like, let's say, you know, the equivalent of the 40 rank in PSP would be your 1 to 8 rank. And so you'd be at the end of the game, and they've, you know, been training crossbows their entire career, and they're at like 2 or 3, whereas your regular archer is, you know, already at max rank and potentially higher than that. But yeah, they're just sitting there slowly training. They haven't picked up a new skill in ages, because while you can technically get more skills into them by feeding them people, don't worry, it's not as cool as it sounds. Effectively, that would allow them to get more skills, but not more skill slots. So in many cases, if, for example, you picked up a random generic zombie, they wouldn't actually have their skill slots. This is actually one of those other things that's kind of quietly forgotten about that version. That skill slots were something that you had to buy. And additionally, those skill slots that you ended up buying, like when you recruited somebody, you didn't actually recruit their full kind of 10 slot list. Honestly, this is one that I'm surprised like doesn't get mentioned a little bit more. Because one of those really annoying things back from PSP is that you were limited to 4 skills when you were recruiting somebody. There was never an explanation for why that arbitrary thing was there, but if you recruited any random unit from anywhere, they would only keep their top 4. So you'd see a guy, and it's like, oh shoot, you know, this guy has, let's say, you know, augment dark or something, and I want to transfer that to somebody, right? Which there should be another video that's out when this is out. Over just kind of leveling and cross-classing differences, because again, you know, one of those weird Mandela effect kind of things about the PSP version. But as far as skill transfers go, effectively this meant that you would kind of permanently kill a unit, and then their dead body would be in your inventory, and then you could transfer their skills FFT crystal style to somebody else. Again, sounds cooler than it really is, but they would only ever have 4 skill slots when you ended up recruiting them. So, for example, if that augment dark or whatever else was in slot 5, they just forget that they ever knew it in the first place. They literally would forget the majority of their skills if you were recruiting somebody in endgame. So most of the time, all they would actually keep is, you know, a handful of random passives they probably could get pretty easily, and forget all of the ranked skills that they had outside of their primary weapon. Not even that, 2 of their skill slots would probably be dedicated to 2 weapon types, due to the fact that the AI liked to kind of spawn things randomly. So they were given 2 weapon types to give them 2 different weapon categories to spawn from. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that that limitation was always there. But yeah, as far as zombies go, we're again kind of getting a little bit off track here. As far as zombies go, they were given a pretty massive glow up in this one, where they just have all of their skills ready to go when you get them, so you don't need to worry about them getting shafted, as it were. Entirely different video in and of itself, but there's actually a lot of skills that classes didn't used to have back in PSP that they do get this time around. Which again is just kind of in that pile of stuff that you really don't really ever see come up or anything along those lines. Like, you know, stuff like Engulf or Back Attack used to be something that other classes would have. Engulf used to be Wizard exclusive. Back Attack used to be Rogue exclusive. Actually, no, this used to be Ranger exclusive. Sorry, but yeah, Back Attack is weirdly specific for pretty much only like bad weather and bad terrain, but. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and continue on here. So next is going to be the Shield Bash 10 damage thing. So Shield bashes have always been kind of interesting throughout the series, where, for example, back in SNES, it was more or less a dice roll over whether your shield bash would knock somebody back or just kind of smack. Or, for example, if here, who do we want to use an example? We'll just go ahead and use Anna over here as an example. Funnily enough, she actually originally was Nibeth Zombie, and she ended up becoming a person over the course of the playthrough. One of my favorite units here, but anyway. So yeah, as far as shield bashes go, back in SNES, they originally had the property that most of the time, your shields would knock a target backwards, but it was basically almost a total coin flip. I thought there was more logic to it. Like, I think it's just 50-50 these days, but like, it seemed like maybe it was a strength thing, maybe it was a size thing, but really it probably was just, RNG or what have you. But what's interesting is that with shields, they actually brought in a bunch of weirdly specific things. So they actually brought in a bonus to shields this time around of 10 damage if a target is knocked into something. This is a feature that technically was slightly there back in SNES, but back in SNES, I believe it was just some random low-rolled number, not necessarily exactly 10. And this wasn't a feature in PSP. And the reason that this is significant is because when it comes to the Shield Bash, most of the time you're using it is because it's a quicker attack, it knocks the target backwards, and also is going to be essentially going to be a little bit of a cherry tap move. So in some cases, that slight range of 10 damage is exactly what you need, and especially for a game with health bars going up to the thousands, it's amazing how often that 10 damage difference is really all you need to potentially finish a target off. Now, this technically applies to all knockback type effects. It's not necessarily just the shield bash, but we're just going to say knockback type attacks in general, right? So if a target gets knocked into something, it gets a guaranteed 10 damage. And again, it's weird how often that results in an actual KO rather than, a scaled number or what have you. It's one of those reasons that I've been saying for a while that kind of Tor feels like it was made by a math genius, because there's so many little cases where some tiny number is just sort of thrown in there, and it's like, why is this here? And then you kind of just get those little moments of like, it's crazy how often that 10 damage actually results in something. It's just interesting that it's there. Okay. So next on the pile here is actually going to be the experimental dragons. Now, I talked about this a little bit earlier on one of the recent videos there. But there's a couple of dragons that happen to show up in kind of oddly specific places that are experimental versions of dragons that Nibeth and Georges will have on their teams in Palace of the Dead. Nibeth can summon one of them, and Georges just kind of has one laying next to him. And these are going to be dragons that have the wrong element. Now, there's a couple of ways to interpret this. For one thing, there's a few units out there that have unique elements, and the amount of people that love to scream that every quirky thing about this game is a bug is a little bit frustrating. But in this particular case, I think this actually might have been a reference to yet another weird quirk of the PSP game that I didn't think about when doing the unique unit video. So one of those weird things back in PSP was that you could give the wrong element to a dragon for absolutely no logical reason whatsoever. Like, they didn't have any finishers to take advantage of a particular element. They got no damage bonus for using it. It's like, presumably it was just there because it was easier than taking all of the augments off the list. And this also included things like an octopus. Like, realistically, why would an octopus ever need to augment fire? Like, it just wasn't a thing that they would ever need. And so this time around, they kind of choked it down to the elements that they actually have some reason to use. But it's kind of interesting to see the experimental dragons show up on on 2 units in Palace of the Dead there, just being the completely wrong element. They basically get no benefit from using this, but this is something that everybody's tried at least once if they played the PSP version long enough, wondering if there's any reason whatsoever to use it. And realistically, what it comes down to is that PSP had so many skills that had no use whatsoever to a particular build, and oftentimes just it was artificially padded with random stuff that you'd never touch, like, oh man, resist fool and stuff like that, like, or was it even resist fool? No, it was like, it literally was like spendthrift resistance or something. But it's like, yeah, the one unit in the entire game has this one skill. Do you really need a resistance skill that can rank up for that? God, no, you don't. Uh, like it's one skill that causes you to lose a tiny bit of money if one particular unit takes their turn. Why is there a skill like that from the very beginning of the game? Anyway, so yeah, I like to think that this is the only reason that those were there. But they're two units that have a lot of experiments under their belt. I guess it's kind of just there. Okay, next up is combat cudgels. So this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I loved using cudgels back in PSP there, just because of the whole meme of them being terrible. Where's Divold? Here you are. Actually not. Do I want to do this with Divold? Where's Sherry at? Because she's running hammers, if I recall. And we'll go back to Divold's original build, I suppose. Okay, so what's the deal with combat cudgels? So specifically, we're talking about the maces. There's three weapons that count as combat cudgels, and that's going to be the Balder Mace, the Damascus Mace, and their relevant upgrades, and then the Sagara. Technically, the Cursed Cudgel as well. That's kind of a custom weapon. Anyway, so what's the story there? So the thing is, combat cudgels were there since the PSP version, and staves back in SNES were mostly just like a magic attack bonus that you could put in both hands, so a lot of times you'd have characters running around with two staves. Yeah, the deal with the combat cudgels is in PSP, they wanted to have a sort of slightly more combat-orientated version of the staff for certain units to carry. Their actual, casting stats weren't exactly anything to write home about, / didn't exist in the case of the Damascus Mace. And so they were mostly there for the purpose of just like, here you go, you can technically do more damage with this thing in a melee sense in some situations. But most of the time, unless you train the skill up to the point that you are actually outranking enemy units and also combining it with anatomy, it literally just did one. Despite the fact that it had a higher bonus than other stuff around it, usually the weapon did not actually have the means of penetrating armor, which is ironic for a mace. Anyway, which, by the way, historically speaking, there's been a lot of discussion kind of in HEMA communities and whatever else over different applications of maces and what they might have been useful for. And there's kind of a thought now that a lot of smaller maces might have been more similar to like a police truncheon in roles, where it was just kind of an offhand thing that you could sort of have on the belt as a backup weapon. But mostly there for the purpose of disabling rather than killing something. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But in the case of this mace here, if you ended up getting your anatomy and cudgel ranks high enough, you could potentially use it as a terrible but still amusing weapon, because it had an anatomy bonus on it. Which meant that it actually was helping out in a lot of other kind of quiet, indirect ways, where it was giving you bonus armor versus a lot of things, was giving you, potentially higher penetration versus most units in the game, and so the finishers could potentially one-shot something due to the way that armor kind of breakthrough mechanics worked in that one. Oftentimes it was a question of is it one or is it death? So in the case of the Damascus Mace, though, this meant that, for example, the multi-hit finisher, due to accuracy scaling finishers having a attack bonus, a more significant attack bonus to make up for the fact that they scaled with accuracy. This meant that multi-hit moves on a ranked-up mace could still potentially one-shot something, even if your basic attack did nothing. And what's interesting is that this time around, they kind of carried that over. They just sort of brought it along. Because when it comes to the cudgels, there's not many units that can make very effective use of them. But if you specifically give the maces to your more physical units, they actually can make really excellent use of their finishers, because all of the cudgels essentially have this thing where they are only using 10% of their actual attack power when attacking normally, which seems really weird when most of the category essentially only has that 1 damage to them, right? And this is what, as repeat with me here, a large portion of the community assumed was a bug for a while, because they're like, oh, it doesn't do damage, it's got attack 84, what gives? So the thing is, I think they're actually trying to recreate that same armor feeling from PSP here, because these will, just like in PSP, continue to do 1 damage until suddenly they kill something with a finisher. It's the only category that's given so severe of a nerf to its damage, where again, it's only using 10% of what it's got there. So like the standard cudgels are basically having a 0.1 attack. These things are having like 8. In most cases, again, you just won't see anything from them, but then as soon as you use a finisher, these are not going to be subject to that rule, and so suddenly, something like a Wrathful Strike, a Pressure Whirl, those will actually be pretty decently threatening. So it's kind of interesting that that was there. This time around, the anatomy bonus doesn't really, it doesn't really matter in this context. It's just more of a 5% to golems, but it does still have a stun effect on there, which is kind of neat with its supposed historical role of being a kind of like police truncheon, as it were. Anyway, still spell range +4, pretty solid on a Terenius that's looking to oppress with debuffs. That's why I ended up running this on him for a decently long time. I think I only ended up changing him over for a video once and then just forgot to change him back, because mentally I still have him here as the cudgel guy. Anyway, let's see. Quick little coffee break here. Alrighty, so next we're going to talk about a kind of broad category that was changed a bit, and that's going to be certain crafted weapons. So specifically we're going to use the rapier as an example this time around. But there were several crafted weapons from PSP that had a cool niche that they never got to really see. So back in PSP, there was a sort of redundant system, because it loved its redundant systems. In this redundant system, you had essentially the tarot cards that you pick up in the field that also served as a secondary pile of your buff and debuff items. So effectively, you just sort of pick them up at the same time. This time around, you just get more buff and debuff items in the field. But the thing is, those cards were originally there because people would constantly forget to go to the store. And this might seem, again, like a weirdly specific phenomenon, but every time that I saw new players running into this, every time that like when we did a community run, or any time that that somebody would be asking over, how do I get past this, that, or the other, that question had like an 80% chance to come up of, did you actually ever visit the store? And so again, it felt like these cards were a redundant mechanic that allowed somebody to have those buff and debuff items when they forgot to buy them. Because they were specifically located at the bottom of your item list. It's where people would be panic searching. And so anyways, you ended up getting these pretty frequently, but pretty randomly. The reason that this is relevant to the rapier is because that there were several weapons that actually utilized them for the purpose of crafting, and the rapier was one of them. So, for example, you'd hear about people using Volges, you'd hear about people using stuff like the breach swords and stuff like that. But when it came to the False Strike rapier, even though it arguably would have been way more useful in that version, this is a weapon that basically never got used. And mostly this came down to the fact that it actually required one of those cards to craft. That effectively you had a random drop that was required in order to pick up this weapon that had a little kind of niche moment that it actually could come up. So either way, in this version they just ended up changing it to the standard item here, so it'll use a Haun's Tome instead of whatever card it was that did that. Was it Wheel? No, it wasn't Wheel. I want to say it was like Hangman or something. But either way, this time around, yeah, you just get the basic item. It's caused a lot of these weapons to finally get used, which, is just kind of cool to see. Okay, next is the Recruit Cap. This is something that, again, you see brought up every now and then. So why would Recruit be capped off in terms of its usefulness? Like, is there any particular reason that, that for whatever reason or another, units wouldn't be able to have as high Recruit odds? And I think this actually just comes down to the fact that Recruit is already freaking overpowered as hell. It doesn't get brought up as often as it probably should be, but, like, Recruit is pretty crazy overpowered. Also, I just noticed I'm looking around for Recruit skills. It's not currently going to be active because of the mod that's active in the background. Like the only one we're gonna find. Oh no, it's not. Is it even on him? Let's see. Does he have those things on him? Yes, there we go. Sorry, the Union level 0 mod, it basically causes most classes to not have access to the recruit skill anymore, just because of how overpowered they are. So anyway, so yeah, your knights will have recruit at this point, just so you know. Um, so getting back to it though, so what's kind of the deal with the recruit cap? So back in PSP, if you snacked? Well, if you stack together Anatomy and Recruit, both of those were rankable skills, and both of them could essentially stack on top of each other to go and give you incredibly high recruit odds, meaning that you could potentially get like 80 to 100% recruit odds. And I know already there's going to be somebody in the comments like, well, I prefer it, the numbers are higher. But here's the thing. You have to realize that this version was made with a lot more savviness to the stuff that was, broken or whatever else in previous versions. And Recruit has always been one of the most overpowered things in these games, where you actually had the same thing back in Night of Lotus there, where essentially by using the right type of unit on the right type of other unit, you could just entirely beat fights with no issue whatsoever by just running up and spam recruiting. Oftentimes, even at relatively full health, a unit could just run up and just keep chatting to, like, let's say beast units in Night of Lotus are a total nothing burger because of the fact that beast tamers oftentimes would have 50% or higher from a single attack on that unit. So when it came to these recruit skills, yes, it is on paper a fun thing to potentially stack out a unit and be able to immediately talk them into joining your side. But considering that this is effectively an action skill you can use at the end of your turn, you simply attack and recruit, it's already going to be insanely strong just because of that niche alone. A lot of the speedrun, for those that watched it, essentially involves just smacking a unit and spamming a recruit, because automatically you have like a 7 to 30% chance to just remove a piece off the board and have them join you permanently. You get all of their equipment, they immediately join your side, you've already finished off that unit, and this is one skill that's giving you skills, that's giving you money, that's giving you free wins, So it's already incredibly strong there. Not to mention it had its cost reduced in this version. So the roughly 40% odds cap on this thing, I think, is well beyond fair. I mean, honestly, they could have capped it at 20%. It still would have been incredibly strong. Because this is, functionally speaking, an insta-kill on that unit and a free unit delivered to you with all of their stuff and everything else. So, yeah. Really solid skill. I don't know why it gets overlooked so often. It's bizarre to me. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on then. So next up is going to be the Brigandine. So this is going to be a quirky little one here. Let's go ahead and see what differences make who I picked for this. So the Brigandine is going to be this right here. It's a piece of equipment that actually used to look a decent bit different. And the only reason that I'm bringing this up here is because it's a pretty obvious example of a thing whose visuals have changed a decent bit in Reborn. So in this version, there's a lot of extra detail added to stuff that oftentimes is overlooked when folks are complaining about, oh no, graphics look smudgy, which honestly comparing the two, they really don't. It's weird how one argument, one random day back on the release day just kind of stretched into a long-term thing. Anyway, so originally the Brigandine kind of looked more like that Jigla set that we're looking over there on the left, where effectively it was one color, but it didn't have most of its details. So like the belts and such, it was literally it basically looked like a potato that somebody could wear, right? So the belts that we see across the top and waist of the Brigandine, as well as its different variants, that's just not a detail that was there before. For whatever reason, it just didn't have belts. It kind of looked like a Gambazin, and in fact, that's why the One Vision mod labeled it as a Gambazin. These belts actually got added in this version, and it's one of the more obvious kind of visual changes there. Like you'll notice even on the Jigla set there, I'm using it as an example because, the belts are basically the same color as it, but you can still see that they were added in there. So just kind of an interesting little quirk there. Okay, next up, Steelback Therapy. We're not going to be able to show it much on this particular thing, so we'll just go back to Azelston here, I guess. He looks like somebody that would steal things. So, stealing. All right, that one, like we've already talked about the kind of misremembering of rogues and stuff like that, but when it came to stealing your items back, when it came to stealing items back, that was one of those kind of improved quality of life things that they changed in this version. So for those that don't know what I'm talking about, if a unit steals your loot, it tells you what that loot is, and then it's just attached to that unit. So if you kill them, you get it back. Back in PSP and earlier versions, it was just deleted on the spot. So, anyways, let's let's go ahead and talk about that real quick, because I feel like this was probably one of the most therapeutic changes that this version made. Because that particular instance right there of, of items getting deleted, especially if you knew what that item was, especially if you were going out of your way to get it, if you were tired one day, you already secured, used Chariot to make sure that you got the item that you wanted, you had gone through all that effort, and then you ended up saving after an item that you thought you got, only to then realize that later that the AI stole it. That was some of the most frustrating shit in that version. I know it happened to me before. It happened to a lot of folks that I've talked to before, where they would straight up quit the game after a particularly devastating drop loss. So it almost feels like therapy that you can just go and steal it back this time. And actually, one of the other quiet changes that they made in the opposite direction is that items are deleted upon a unit falling to their death, because they presumably are unrecoverable. And this includes your own units getting potentially thrown off a cliff, where, simply put, if they fell off with all their equipment, why is it reappearing in your inventory after the fight, that dude just sort of fell into hell, who climbed down there to get him. So, again, quiet little change, but it just added a lot of immersion to the world to have those two mechanics in play, that it just made everything feel a lot more tangible, as it were. So, either way, cool little quirky change there.